2 Chronicles 6, chapter 6. Then Solomon said, "The Almighty God intends to dwell in the dark clouds. I have built you a princely house, the base for your enthronement forever." The king turned and blessed the whole assembly of Israel. While the whole assembly of Israel stood, he said, "Blessed be the Almighty God, the God of Israel, who with his own mouth spoke a promise to David my father, and by his hand fulfilled it, saying, Since the day I brought my people out of the land of Egypt, I have not chosen a city out of any tribe of Israel for the building of a house that my name might be there, nor have I chosen any man to be ruler of my people Israel. But now I have chosen Jerusalem that my name may be there, and I have chosen David to rule my people Israel. When David my father wished to build a house for the name of the Almighty, the God of Israel, the Almighty God said to him, In wishing to build a house for my name, you did well, but it is not you who will build the house, but your son who comes from your loins. He shall build the house for my name. Now the Almighty God has fulfilled the word he spoke. I have succeeded David my father, and I sit on the throne of Israel. And the Almighty God has said, And I have built this house for the name of the Almighty, the God of Israel, and I have placed there the ark, and which is the covenant of the Almighty God that he made with the Israelites. Solomon's prayer. Then he stood before the altar of the Almighty God in the presence of the whole assembly of Israel and stretched forth his hands. Solomon had made a bronze platform from cubits long, 5 cubits wide, and 3 cubits high, which he had placed in the middle of the courtyard. Having ascended it, Solomon knelt in the presence of the whole assembly of Israel and stretched forth his hands toward heaven. He said, The Almighty God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven or on earth. You keep the covenant and love toward your servants who walk before you with their whole heart, and the covenant that you kept toward your servant, David, my father. That which you promised him, your mouth has spoken, and your hand has fulfilled this very day. And now the Almighty, the God of Israel, keep toward your servant David, my father, what you promised. There shall never be wanting someone from your line to sit before me on the throne of Israel, provided that your descendants keep to their way, walking by my law as you have. Now the Almighty God of Israel, may the words which you spoke to David your servant be confirmed. Is God indeed to dwell with human beings on earth? If the heavens and the highest heavens cannot contain you, how much less this house which I have built? Regard kindly the prayer and petition of your servant, the Almighty my God, and listen to the cry of supplication which I, your servant, utter before you. May your eyes be open day and night toward this house, the place where you have decreed your name shall be. Listen to the prayer your servant made toward this place. Listen to the petition your servant and of your people Israel, which they offer toward this place. Listen from the place of your enthronement, heaven, and listen and forgive. If someone sins against a neighbor and is required to take an oath sanctioned by a curse and comes and takes the oath before your altar in this house, listen in heaven, act and judge your servants. Condemn the wicked, requiting their ways, acquit the just, rewarding their justice. When your people Israel are defeated by an enemy because they have sinned against you, and then they turn, praise your name, pray to you and entreat you in this house, Listen from heaven and forgive the sin of your people Israel, and bring them back to the land you gave them and their ancestors. And when the heavens are closed so that there is no rain, because they have sinned against you, but they pray toward this place and praise your name and turn from their sin because you have afflicted them, listen in heaven and forgive the sin of your servants, your people Israel, for you teach them the good way in which they should walk. Give rain upon this of yours which you have given to your people as their heritage. If there is famine in the land or pestilence, or if blight comes, or a mildew or locust swarm or caterpillars when their enemies besiege them at any of their gates, whatever plague or sickness there may be, whatever prayer or petition any may make, any of your people Israel, who know affliction and pain, and stretch out their hands toward this house, listen from heaven, the place of your enthronement, and forgive. Render to each and all according to their ways, you who know every heart. For it is you alone who know the heart of every human being. So may they revere you and walk in your ways as long as they live on the land you gave our ancestors. To the foreigners, likewise, who are not of your people Israel, but who come from a distant land, from the sake of your great name, your mighty hand and outstretched arm, and come in prayer to this house, listen from heaven, the place of your enthronement. Do all that the foreigner asks of you, that all the peoples of the earth may know your name, may revere you as you do your people Israel, and may know that your name have been invoked upon this house that I have built. And when your people go out to war against their enemies by whatever way you send them, and they pray to you toward the city you have chosen, and the house I have built for your name, listen from heaven to their prayer and petition, and uphold their cause. And when they sin against you, for there is no one who does not sin, and in your anger against them you deliver them to an enemy, so that their captors carry them off to another land, far or near, and they have a change of heart in the land that their captivity, in the land of their captivity, and they turn and entreat you in the land of their captors, and say, we have sinned and done wrong, we have been wicked. If with all their heart and soul they come back to you in the land of those who took them captive, and pray toward their land which you gave their ancestors, the city you have chosen, in the house which I have built for your name, listen from heaven, the place of your enthronement, to their prayer and petitions, and uphold their cause. Forgive your people who have sinned against you. Now, my God, may your eyes be open and your ears be attentive to the prayer of this place. And now, arise, Almighty God, come to your resting place. You and your majestic ark, your priest, Almighty God, will be clothed with salvation. Your faithful ones rejoice in good things. Almighty God, do not reject the plea of your anointed. Remember the devotion of David, your servant. 2 Chronicles 7. Chapter 7. When Solomon had entered his prayer, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offerings and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Almighty God filled the house. But the priests could not enter the house of the Almighty God, for the glory of the Almighty God filled the house of the Almighty God. All the Israelites looked on while fire came down, and the glory of the Almighty God was upon the house. And they fell down upon the pavement with their faces to the earth and worship, praising the Almighty God, who is so good, whose love endures forever. The king and all the people offered sacrifices before the Almighty God. King Solomon offered as a sacrifice 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. End of the dedication. Thus the king and all the people dedicated the house of God. The priests were standing at their stations, as were the Levites, with the musical instruments of the Almighty God, which King David had made to give thanks to the Almighty God, whose love endures forever. And when David offered the praise through them, the priests opposite them blew the trumpets, and all Israel stood. Then Solomon consecrated the middle of the court facing the house of the Almighty God. He offered there the burnt offerings and the fat of the communion offerings, since the bronze altar which Solomon had made could not hold the burnt offerings, the grain offerings, and the fat. On this occasion, Solomon and with him all Israel, a great assembly from Lebo Hamath to the Wadi of Egypt, celebrated the festival for 7 days. And on the 8th day, they held a solemn assembly, for they had celebrated the dedication of the altar for 7 days and the feast for 7 days. And on the 23rd day of the 7th month, he dismissed the people to their tents, rejoicing and glad of heart because of all the blessings the Almighty God had given to David, to Solomon, and to his people Israel. Solomon finished building the house of the Almighty God, the house of the king, and everything else he wanted to do in regard to the house of the Almighty God in his own house. God's promise to Solomon. The Almighty God appeared to Solomon during the night and said to him, I have heard your prayer, and now have chosen this place for my house of sacrifice. If I close heaven so that there is no rain, if I command the locust to devour the land, if I send pestilence among my people, if then my people of whom my name has been pronounced humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their evil ways, I will hear them from heaven and pardon their sins and heal their land. Now therefore my eyes shall be open and my ears attentive to the prayer of this place. Now I have chosen and consecrated this house that my name may be there forever. My eyes and my heart shall be there always. As for you, if you walk before me as David your father did, doing all that I have commanded you and keeping my statutes and ordinances, I will establish the throne of your kingship as I covenanted with David your father, when I said, there shall never be wanting someone from your line as ruler in Israel. But if ever you turn away and forsake my commandments and statutes which I set before you, and proceed to serve other gods and bow down to them, I will uproot the people from the land I gave and repudiate the house I have consecrated for my name, and I will make it a proverb and a byword among all the nations. And this house, which is so exalted, every passerby shall be horrified and ask, why has the Almighty God done such things to this land and to this house? And the answer will come, because they abandoned the Almighty, the God of their ancestors, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, and they embraced other gods, bowing down to them and serving them. That is why he has brought upon them all this evil. 2 Chronicles chapter 8. Public works. And after the 20 years during which Solomon built the house of the Almighty God, his own house, he built up the cities which Hiram had given him, and settled Israelites there. Then Solomon went to Hamath of Zobah and conquered it. He built Tadmor in the wilderness and all the supply cities which he built in Hamath. He built Upper Beth Horon and Lower Beth Horon, fortified cities with walls, gates, and bars. Also Baalath, all the supply cities belonging to Solomon, and all the cities for the chariots, the cities for horses, and whatever else Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem and Lebanon, and the entire land under his dominion. All the people who were left of the Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, who were not Israelites, those of their descendants who were left in the land and whom the Israelites had not destroyed, Solomon conscripted as forced laborers, as they are to this day. But Solomon made none of the Israelites forced laborers for his works, for they were his fighting force, commanders, adjutants, chariot officers, and cavalry. They were also King Solomon's 250 overseers who directed the people. Solomon's piety. Solomon brought the daughter of Pharaoh up from the city of David to the house which he had built for her. For he said, no wife of mine shall dwell in the house of David, king of Israel, for the places where the ark of the Almighty God have come are holy. In those times, Solomon sacrificed burnt offerings to the Almighty God upon the altar and of the Almighty God which he had built in front of the porch, as was required to be done day by day according to the command of Moses, especially on the Sabbath, at the new moons, and on the fixed festivals 3 times a year, on the feast of the unleavened bread, the feast of weeks, and the feast of booths. And according to the ordinance of David his father, he appointed the various divisions of the priests for their service, and the Levites according to their functions, praise and attendance upon the priests as the daily duty required. The gatekeepers by their divisions stood guard at each gate, since such was the command of David, the man of God. There was no deviation from the king's command in whatever related to the priests and Levites or the treasuries. All of Solomon's work was carried out successfully from the day of the foundation of the house of the Almighty God was laid until its completion. The house of the Almighty God was finished. Glories of the court. In those times Solomon went to Ezion Geber, to the Elath on the seashore of the land of Edom. Hiram had his servants send him ships, and his own servants escort seamen. They went with Solomon's servants to Ophir and obtained there 450 talents of gold and brought it to King Solomon. 2 Chronicles chapter 9. The Queen of Sheba. The Queen of Sheba, having heard a report of Solomon's fame, came to Jerusalem to test him with subtle questions, accompanied by a very numerous retinue and by camels bearing spices and a large amount of gold and precious stones. She came to Solomon and spoke to him about everything that she had on her mind. And Solomon explained to her everything she asked about, and there was nothing so obscure that Solomon could not explain it to her. And when the Queen of Sheba witnessed Solomon's great wisdom, the house he had built, the food at his table, and the seating of his ministers, the attendance and dress of his waiters, his cupbearers and their dress, and the burnt offerings, his sacrifice in the house of the Almighty God, it took her breath away. And their report I heard in my country about your deeds and your wisdom is true. She told the king, I did not believe their report until I came and saw with my own eyes that not even the half of your great wisdom had been told to me. You have surpassed the report I heard. Happy your servants, very happy these ministers of yours who stand before you always and listen to your wisdom. Blessed be the Almighty your God, who was pleased to set you on his throne as king. For the Almighty God your God, in the love of your God, has for Israel to establish them forever, and he has made you king over them to carry out judgment and justice. Then she gave the king 120 gold talents, a very large quantity of spices and precious stones. Never again did anyone bring such an abundance of spices as the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. The servants of Hiram and of Solomon who brought gold from Ophir also brought cabinet wood and precious stones. With the cabinet wood, the king made stairs for the house of the Almighty God and the house of the king, and harps and lyres for the chapters. The like of these had not been seen before in the land of Judah. King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba everything she desired and asked for, more than she had brought to the king. Then she returned with her servants to her own country. The gold that came to Solomon in 1 year weighed 666 gold talents. In addition to what came from the tolls on travelers and what the merchants brought. All the kings of Arabia also and the governors of the country brought gold and silver to Solomon. King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each shield, and 300 bucklers of beaten gold. 300 shekels of gold went into each buckler, and the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. The king made a large ivory throne and overlaid it with fine gold, and the throne had 6 steps. A footstool of gold was fastened to the throne, and there was an arm on each side of the seat, with 2 lions standing next to the arms, and 12 other lions standing there on the steps, two to a step. Nothing like this was made in any other kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were gold, and all the utensils in the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. There was no silver, for in Solomon's time silver was reckoned as nothing. For the king had ships that went to Tarshish with the servants of Hiram. Once every 3 years of the fleet of Tarshish ships would come with a cargo of gold, silver, ivory, apes, and monkeys. Solomon's renown. Thus the kings Solomon surpassed all the kings of the earth in riches and wisdom. All the kings of the earth sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put into his heart. They all brought their tribute, vessels of silver and gold, garments, weapons, spices, horses, and mules, what was due each year. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses, chariots, and 12,000 horses. These he allocated among the chariot cities and to the king's service in Jerusalem. He was ruler over all the kings from the river to the land of the Philistines and down to the border of Egypt. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and cedars as numerous as the sycamores of the ship Hela. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and from all the lands. The death of Solomon. And the remainder of the acts of Solomon, first and last, are recorded in the acts of Nathan the prophet, and the prophecy of Ahijah and the Shilonite, and in the visions of Iddo the seer concerning Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Solomon was king in Jerusalem over all Israel for 40 years. Solomon rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. His father and Rehoboam, his son, succeeded him as king.